By the late 1800s, reservations had become virtual concentration camps. Most were on barren lands, useless for farming and devoid of game. Indian people were forced to live off of U.S. food rations, promised in treaties in return for their lands. Providing subsidies and food for over 200,000 Indian people was big business. The distribution system quickly became a corrupt network of government agents and their partners, known as the Indian Ring.
If they bring any goods for the Indians, the agents live off of them. And pay has been taken by the agents. And they have put money in their pockets. The steamboat came in the night and took away boxes of goods so that the Indians would not know it. Struck by the Yankton.
Robbing nations of their meager government subsidies, the Indian Ring left the people in abject poverty.
And they hoped, it seems to me, to take away the spirit of the people so that we become more docile, so to speak. We would then only depend upon them for the way to be. We would have to go to whoever brought out the rations.
I noticed a small group of Indians who sat under a tree. All were dirty, ragged, and lean. Soon an Indian woman and a young girl hurried into the group and laid down packs and opened them. I could see spread out there some dingy meat, evidently waste from a butcher's shop, and some discarded scraps of stale bread and other stray odds and ends of food. I felt a wave of fury toward our government's whole Indian policy. Thomas Tibbles, reporter.
Many Eastern reformers were determined to break the Indian Ring, but they believed that the only lasting solution was change, not only for the bureaucrats, but for the Indian people themselves. Indian ways were judged as backward and wrong, that for their own good, their cultures had to be erased. Indian people were to be remade in their reformers' image.
The Indians' only safe future can be found in merging their interests with ours and becoming part of the people of the United States. Their safe course is to quit being tribal Indians, to go out and live among us as individual men, to adopt our language, our industries, and become a part of the power. Richard Pratt, Director, Carlisle Indian School.
The policy of stripping Indian people of their cultures became official with the 1887 passage of the General Allotment Act. The act broke apart communal land holdings, assigning plots to individuals in an effort to force them to live like white farmers.
As long as Indians live in villages, they will retain many of their old and injurious habits. Heathen ceremonies and dances, constant visiting. I trust that before another year is ended, they will generally be located upon individual land or farms. Government Commissioner.
Supported by an alliance of Eastern reformers and Western land speculators, allotment attacked both the sovereignty of Indian nations and the fundamental concept of land belonging to all the people.
This is only another trick of the whites to take our land away from us. And they have played these tricks before. Hollow Horn Bear, Ogallala.
The allotment system was ripe for massive fraud. Corrupt agents declared small children, dogs, and horses as allottees, then seized their lands and sold them. Indian orphans were shuffled off to white families who adopted them to obtain title to their allotments. After allotment plots were handed out to Indian people, the U.S. government was free to sell the remaining reservation lands to whites. During the allotment period, Indian nations would lose 2/3 of the little land that remained in their hands. 2 years after the passage of the Allotment Act, Oklahoma Indian Territory was officially opened to settlers. What followed were the famous land rushes. The territories of the Creek, Cherokee, and other nations were overrun. Lands which had been promised them as permanent, unassailable refuges in exchange for their lands east of the Mississippi. But of all the government policies designed to end Indian cultures, the cruelest was yet to come. Indian people would be robbed of even their children. Across the country, Indian children, some as young as 4 years old, were taken from their parents, often by force, and sent to boarding schools. At the boarding schools, children were stripped of all outward appearances linking them to their Indian past.
Our belongings were taken from us. Even the little medicine bags our mothers had given us to protect us from harm. Everything was placed in a heap and set afire. Next was the long hair, the pride of all the Indians. The boys, one by one, would break down and cry when they saw the braids thrown on the floor. Lone Wolf, Blackfeet.
Children were forbidden to speak of their traditions and severely punished if they used their native languages. Fed distorted images of evil Indians, many came to doubt their own identity.
I remember growing up that I never really felt good about myself. We were taught to be ashamed of who we were and who we are. And it hurts when you're young and you're trying to understand.
We all wore white man's clothes and ate white man's food and went to white man's churches and spoke white man's talk. And so after a while, we also began to say Indians were bad. We laughed at our own people and their blankets and cooking pots and sacred societies and dances. Sun Elk, Taos.
Many boarding schools were set up in converted military posts, where for decades soldiers had been trained to fight Indian people. Students slept on cots in cement barracks and were drilled daily in strict military regimen.
It was like an army barrack. They marched just like they do in an army when you first go into the army. We marched to school. We marched to eat. They took us to church. We marched to church. We lived kind of an army-style life. And we went to school that way.
If we thought the days were bad, the nights were much worse. This was the time when real loneliness set in. Many boys ran away, but most of them were caught and brought back by the police. We were told never to talk Indian, and if we were caught, we got a strapping with a leather belt. I remember one evening when we were all lined up in a room, and one of the boys said something Indian to another boy. The man in charge caught him by the shirt and threw him across the room. Later we found out his collarbone was broken.
The priest would take a leather harness strap and he would beat my husband. And every time that strap would come down on him, how he would repeat to himself, "I'll never forget my language." He was thinking that, "I will never forget my language."
The boy's father, an old warrior, came to the school. He told the instructor that among his people, children were never punished by striking them. That was no way to teach children. Kind words and good examples were much better. Lone Wolf, Blackfeet.
Each day stretched into another endless day. Each night for tears to fall. Tomorrow, my sister said. Tomorrow never came. And so the days passed by, and the changes slowly came to settle within me. Gone were the vivid pictures of my parents, sisters, and brothers. Only a blurred vision of what used to be. Desperately, I tried to cling to the faded past, which was slowly being erased from my mind.
For traditional cultures, the effect was devastating. Boarding school graduates returned to the schools and encouraged new students, fresh from the reservations, to give up their traditions.
Don't look back. All that has passed away. This country through here is all improved. You saw when you were coming. Cities, railroads, houses, manufactories. Boys, this was once all our country, but our fathers had not their eyes open as we have. Now, the only way to hold our land is to get educated ourselves. Henry Jones, Creek.
But the home cultures were not altogether powerless against boarding school invasion. Many held firmly to their traditions, and returning graduates who did not readapt found they had no place in their old world.
It was a warm summer evening when I got off the train at Taos Station. The first Indian I met, I asked him to run out to the Pueblo and tell my family I was home. The Indian couldn't speak English, and I had forgotten all my Pueblo language. Next morning, the governor of the Pueblo and 2 war chiefs came into my father's house. They did not talk to me. They did not even look at me. The chief said to my father, "Your son, who calls himself Raphael, has lived with the white men. He has been far away. He has not learned the things that Indian boys should learn. He has no hair. He cannot even speak our language. He is not one of us." Sanok, Taos.
These things that made life for us the most important thing, these were the things that took away from us. And today, so many of our Indian children have forgotten their language, even here on our reservation, because they took that language away from us, our language that God gave us.